a virtual meeting about DADU overlays, as you know, and as I think Matthew will share in more detail. DADUs have been around for a little while, and some parts of District 18 already have them, especially those districts, those zoning districts that are R for residential and do allow like duplexes. Those areas that are RS at this point do not, but that's primarily what the overlay that we tool that we passed last year allows. I'm going to let Matthew, who is the council staff in charge, our expert on planning and codes matters. I'm going to let him go into all the details about that, and then we can ask questions related to that, and then I'll talk more about like a process going forward and what I think it should look like if there are folks that are interested, and I believe that there are. So we can start that process, and especially well, I'll get to that later. But and like I said, I think we've had a few more people chime in. If you can let me know in the chat, like your address, or if at some point in the next, after the meeting, you want to email me at tom.cash@nashville.gov to let me know if what your opinions are, if you want to pursue a DADU overlay in your area, and especially if you're willing to help go door to door or have a small, like block meeting or something to help share this information with others, then definitely reach out to me. All right. Matthew, if you want to go ahead.
Great. So I will just give a brief background on DADUs and then launch into the overlay that's more recent. So the modern idea of DADU in terms of Nashville zoning was created back in 2011. It basically created the definition for a detached accessory dwelling and laid out the first codes and regulations for them. And that in that initial legislation, DADUs were only permitted in historic overlay districts. So that was very restrictive on where DADUs could be. More recently, in 2014, was when you had a bit of a broadening of where DADUs could be. So it expanded the allowed area of DADUs into any R zone district, which is single family and two family, which is what most of the Belmont Hillsborough neighborhood is zoned, whereas most of the Hillsborough Weston neighborhood is zoned RS, which is just single family. So in 2014, that's when we got the current definition and a lot of the current regulations for the DADUs themselves. And then recently last year, the DADU overlay bill was passed, which allows the creation of an overlay subject to certain conditions that I'll go into a bit later, to be created for single family, and even it can include R zone properties as well, but it's mostly targeted towards single family neighborhoods in areas where the residents may want to have that option to have a DADU, but not necessarily want to have their neighborhood turn into a bunch of two family dwelling units. So just moving on into DADU is, so in Nashville, a DADU is a detached accessory dwelling unit that is separate from the principal structure on the same lot. And they can be located, and as it stands now, outside of an overlay, of the DADU overlay, they can be located in a historic overlay district that allows for them, an urban design overlay district that allows for them, or within R zoned areas, as long as they are on an improved accepted alleyway. So it has to either be abut the side or the rear of the property, the alley, and it has to be built. Or the lot size that it's going to be built on is 15,000 square feet. And those are kind of high bars to meet for a lot of parts of the county. So there's some restricted areas on where they can go. And that standard regarding the alleyway and the 15,000 square foot lot size does carry over to the DADU overlay. So even if you're in the DADU overlay, you still have to meet those standards, which is why if you look at the map on the screen, you can see a lot of that area is still gray versus the colored areas, which are clusters that could be a DADU overlay. Some of the basic requirements for a DADU include, let me get down to it. Sorry. There we go. Generally, the dwelling area has to be subordinate in size to the principal dwelling area. So the DADU must be smaller than the principal dwelling area. It cannot be divided or sold separately from the principal dwelling. So it can't be turned into a horizontal property regime and split off. And so it can't be, it has to have same ownership essentially. It has to meet the same setback requirements for accessory buildings. It has to be behind the house. You can't build a DADU in your front yard. You have to have access from the alley if there's an alley present. If you're on a large lot, like a 15,000 square foot lot, you have to share a driveway with the main house. You can't have a separate driveway for the DADU. And then the key thing that really helps keep this accessory is that the living space is limited to 700 square feet. So you can have a garage with a DADU on top, and the total square footage of the garage can exceed the 700 square feet because the garage isn't considered living space. But the actual apartment or the living area is only limited to 700 square feet. And then if the lot is less than 10,000 square feet, so if you're on a small lot, say a 7,000 square foot lot, the totality of the footprint cannot exceed 750 square feet. So you can do a garage apartment where it's above the garage, but the footprint is limited to 750 square feet. So you can't really do like a more suburban style single level garage with the DADU next to it on the same level. It would need to be on top, or it would just need to be the DADU by itself in that case. And so it's generally supposed to match the style of, in terms of like roof and whatnot, with the principal structure. And then another key thing that differentiates this from a more standard two-family use is that you are also, when you apply for the permit to build the DADU, you're required to put a restrictive covenant on the property prior to the issuance of the permit. That is essentially saying that you're going to meet all of the conditions for a DADU, and that anybody that buys that property in the future will also be held to those same conditions of the DADU. And so that's generally what a DADU. And now I'm going to move into the DADU overlay, which is what we passed last year. It's been adopted in a couple of places. The Highland Heights neighborhood in East Nashville has adopted it. And then there's a fairly large one in North Nashville, just north of I-40, that goes on up towards Cumberland Gardens, that has recently adopted it as well. And so for the DADU overlay, as I said previously, it's primarily targeted towards residential single-family zone districts, but it can also be applied on residential zone districts as well, so R or RS. And it permits, well, it's pretty simple. It just permits to be built in the area where the overlay is applied. The key things to note from the overlay is that you are required to apply the overlay. You're required to have 30 contiguous parcels. So you need to get your neighbors on board. You can't just have a council member apply it to your property alone. And then the other thing too is it cannot abut directly residential single-family zoning that is not included in the overlay. So it can abut our zoning outside of the overlay, and it can abut multifamily and mixed use and non-residential. But it cannot directly abut single-family. So it needs to be separated from the single-family portions that's not included in the overlay by something like a railroad track or a road or an alleyway. The other key thing that the overlay does is it prohibits the accessory dwelling unit from being used for any short-term rental use. So you cannot use the accessory dwelling unit for an owner-occupied short-term rental. You can, however, continue or start using a portion of the principal structure for a short-term rental. So it doesn't completely preclude the property from short-term renting. It just precludes the accessory unit from short-term renting. And in terms of applying the overlay, it's the same as any other zone change. Councilman Cash would submit an application to the Planning Commission with the boundaries. And based on your feedback, if you guys wanted to be in it, planning would review it. It would have a public hearing at the Planning Commission for you guys to come out and speak in support or against of it. And then once it gets a recommendation, then Councilman Cash can introduce it at council, and it will have another public hearing at council for you guys to come out and speak to council about your support or opposition to it before it became an adopted overlay. So that's really the full picture of it. I hope I didn't cause any eyes to glaze over. It can get a little weedy in there talking about the minutia of it. But if you guys have any questions, let me know, and then I will turn it back over to Councilman Cash to look at the different areas in the district that we've identified that could support it. The map on the screen now is Hillsborough West End, Hillsborough West End. The colored areas are different areas where you could theoretically have a DADU overlay. And then the Belmont Hillsborough neighborhood is a little bit different. The red area is a potential overlay area because it's residential single family zone, and it has alley access. The remaining portion that's in green is zoned R8, so it's already eligible for a DADU if it meets the current standards based on the presence or not presence of a historic overlay, presence of an alley, lot size, etc. The one area that I will say that I accidentally omitted is the south side of Cedar Lane. Does have alley access. It does not have 30 lots, so on its own it could not be included. But if some of these R8 lots around it, maybe on the north side of Primrose, were open to being in the DADU overlay, then you could look at maybe doing a DADU overlay down there as well. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Councilman Cash.
Okay, thanks. And I see that there's one question, I think, maybe more than one, but at least one in the chat, and it says, Miriam has read that it was limited to 750 square feet, but we're saying 700. Oh, wait, you answered that, didn't you? Or somebody did.
So 700 is the living area. The footprint is 750 square feet. So
Gotcha. Yeah.
100 is the living area. And that's for lots of 10,000 square feet or less, which I think are most. There's some larger lots mixed into your district, but for the most part, they're all sub 10,000. So for that area, the footprint is 750 square feet. The living area is 700. If you go larger than 10,000, the footprint is a bit more. I've left it on there. I'll look it up and type it into the chat.
Okay, thanks. And I see John Tassel's, I haven't scrolled to see if there's an answer there, but for short-term rental use, could the property owner move into the DADU and rent out the entire original house?
So I think that gets into a little bit more of Airbnb policy or short-term rental policy. I know for owner occupied, you cannot list the house as a full home rental unless you already, so I'll caveat that with depending on when you got your permit, because the state law says that if you got your permit prior to the adoption of a law, you're grandfathered in for the life of the permit. So
Right.
if you have an older permit that did not have those restrictions on it, you can still do that.
Gotcha. And so related to that, like in the areas in Belmont Hillsborough where where DADUs are already currently allowed, are they allowed to be rented out as short-term rental?
Yeah, so if you're outside of the DADU overlay, there is no restriction on use of the DADU for short-term rental purposes. You just need to comply with if you don't already have a permit, you need to comply with the most up-to-date short-term rental regulations. And
Gotcha.
I believe you can use the DADU as a short-term rental,
Okay. And is it,
as long as you reside in the main house or vice versa.
so if you have a lot and you own you own both properties and you can get a permit for a short-term rental in the DADU, and is that a owner occupied since it's the
Yeah,
same lot?
so in our districts, you're only entitled to owner occupied permits now, so you cannot list it as whole home. But you can list it and say you'll be staying in a detached accessory dwelling unit. Or if you want to move into a detached accessory dwelling unit, you can say you're staying in some whole, like a portion of the main house. I'm not 100% on how codes regulates that. That would be a good question to email the codes department if you're looking at doing something like that, and they can give you a more concrete answer. But I believe you can do that.
Okay, makes sense. All right, and Aiden, I'm going to get to your question in just a little bit. So, just there are kind of two ways to go about this, and one, I mean, it's a zoning change, and like when we council members rezone a swath of land, a set of properties, we should have a community meeting about it, and and there's a hearing at planning, and then it goes through 3 readings at council, one of which includes a public hearing at council where folks can talk about it. And for a rezone, generally that's what we do. When we both in Belmont Hillsborough and Hillsborough West End in the past have done the conservation zoning overlays, we have gone beyond that and really like go door to door or contact door to door, so that we're not just not just sending notifications to property owners, but really reaching out to communicate with them and see, kind of like when we did I know when we did the expansion in Hillsborough West End, which is basically the property south of Blair and east of Natchez Trace, like we went door to door. We got ballots basically, or surveys where, we ask, do you want to be included in the CZO? Yes, no, or I need more information. And we maybe got a little bit more additional information from that, but we really tried to get, tried to touch each property owner to get their opinion, rather than just saying, hey, this is up, you can come and speak if you're against it. And I really prefer that method, where we're really trying to reach each property owner to get their opinion about it, which is, I think it's a better process in terms of making sure that we know what the true sentiment is about the change. And but the downside is it takes more work. So if folks are interested, I will need help, either going door to door or reaching. I'm sure many of you have contacts for your neighbors without having to go knock on every single door. So that's a good way to start. But so I'll kind of need, I don't know if I want official titles like block captains or something like that. But if, to move forward with this, I want to do it as a community effort, and not just as a rezone that just has a notification. I hope that makes sense. And so to answer your question, Aiden, I would want to, no, nobody has to be forced to build a DADU or a DADU or an outbuilding, but they would want to say, yes, we want to be in this overlay where it is a possibility and where they know it's a possibility, next door and or behind. And kind of some of the information that I'd like to get from folks, not that this is required, but kind of get a sense of, yes, we already have an outbuilding and we're ready to, start getting a permit to build a DADU tomorrow, or, yes, we'd like to do it, in the future sometime, but we don't have a timetable, or no, we'll never do that. And that'll help us get a little bit better sense of, how it will play out. If we have, 30 garages being built all at once, or 30 DADUs being built all at once in the neighborhood, that could be frustrating. So we'll get a little bit, but we can get a little bit better sense of that. And I think
I can jump in and answer a couple of these too. So Miriam asked, are all the green areas already approved for a DADU in the Belmont Hillsborough? So they're not approved per se. They are potentially eligible if they meet the parameters for a DADU, i.e. do they have constructed alley access, or are they 15,000 square feet or larger? So there's going to be a few in here that probably don't meet that. So if you look at the south side of Sweetbriar Avenue, in between Hazelwood and 21st Avenue, those are not going to be eligible because they're not going to be 15,000 square feet and they don't have an alleyway. Additionally, something I forgot to mention is that if you have if you already have 2 dwelling units on the property, you are not going to be eligible for a DADU because in the R zoned areas, you're only allowed to have 2 dwelling units on the property, and an accessory dwelling unit counts as a dwelling unit in that instance. So if you live in an HPR or one of the grandfathered in multifamily developments in the area, you're not going to be able to build a DADU.
And so true for a property with a duplex.
Yeah, so if you have a duplex if you live in half a duplex or half an HPR, you're not going to be DADU eligible. This is only going to be where somebody has a single family home on a lot. The other thing I also forgot to mention is you will still have to meet the requirements in the review and approval process of the Historic Zoning Commission for the various neighborhood conservation overlays that are in the area.
So in other words, their requirements for like architectural aspects of the.
So Historic's going to have to sign off on what you want to do as well.
Right, which is I mean, they would have to sign off on a addition to, which I think a lot of us are used to unless we're new to the area. Also, Miriam says asking about when as well. If you could go back to that map, I could be wrong, but I don't think the green on the WIN map means the same thing that it does on the BHN map, but I could be wrong.
So I apologize about this. So I did not go in. There is no real amount of R zoning in Wedgwood, or I said Wedgwood, Houston, in Hillsborough West End. This area was almost entirely downzoned to RS 7.5 at some point, even the areas where it probably shouldn't have been, where you have all these 2-family and multifamily. So the green area over here is just another area that could be a DADU overlay. And on this one, the blue and the green, it should have just been one color. You can cut that up any way you'd like. So if Barton Avenue on both sides wants to be in it, but nobody north of Fairfax wants to be in it, that's fine. It's just a continuous area. And then the question I saw as well from Laura said that pink area in Belmont Hillsborough, why couldn't we just have that rezoned to R like the rest of the neighborhood? So it looks like that was downzoned from R to RS back in 1998, probably at the request of the residents there at the time. I would defer to Councilman Cash on that. That would be a question for you and your neighbors to decide if you want to change that zoning, if you're comfortable with something like that. And that would be a discussion that you should have with Councilman Cash.
Right. Hey, Laura, do we know if all that area is also in the Belmont CZO?
Yes, I believe it all is.
Okay.
I believe it all is.
Okay. So I mean, I ask that because, if it's not in the CZO, then that would, and Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong here. If it's not in the CZO, then that means, or since it is, it means contributing houses cannot be torn down to make way for duplexes. Non-contributing could be.
So I brought up Parcel Viewer. It is located in the Belmont Hillsborough Conservation Area.
Okay.
And so you would be protected by that if you wanted to upzone to R8 from RS 7.5. I'm not sure why they downzoned in 1998. Neighborhood dynamics might have been different back then or something. So that's a discussion that you guys can have as well as maybe an alternative to adopting the overlay.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Laura, we can talk about that in more detail off the meeting. And I'm trying to remember if I totally answered Aiden's question about so nobody has to nobody's required to build a DADU, but the people that are in
I got you. I just want to make sure that it wasn't like it has to be a certain number of people do it, or you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, well,
there could be an overlay with none of them, right? It's just everybody's like, okay, we're okay with being in an overlay.
Yes, and it'll be 2 public hearings, so even people that are close to it can chime in. I will say it's to rezone somebody's property. To rezone somebody's property, I want to talk to them and know how they feel about it before I do it, and kind of neighborhood as a whole. And I want to talk to the neighborhood association as well, and make sure they feel good about the process. I think that paves the way for good public hearings at planning and at council. Somebody asked about the formula. So technically, technically there's no formula for doing this. And honestly, I don't like to give a hard rule as to what it is. But I will say, like, I definitely want better than 50% of property owners wanting in it. If it's below 50%, I won't feel good about it. And maybe we can see if there's another way to configure it where we can get a better percentage. But technically, it's Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong here, but technically it's me with a group of people deciding that I want to move forward with legislation. And
it's really any sort of rezoning like this is really the prerogative of the council, and with a heavy deference to the district council member.
Right. And I kind of told you all about the process that I'd like to see, and that we're thorough about knowing how people feel, rather than just knowing those that feel strongly for or strongly against, and doing that math. When we did the CZO, both of them, I know that the numbers were really high in terms of approval. I want to say in the upper 80% of property owners. There were owners that especially those that don't live in the property, that we didn't hear from. We didn't get their opinion, but the turnout for chiming in was high, and the approval rate for being in the conservation overlay was high. And that's what to move forward, that's what I want. I'm not saying that it needs to be as high as 80% or in the 80% or above, but if I'd rather it be better than just half and half. Is that I don't remember who asked that, but is that a fair answer? All right, good.
So there were a couple of questions about the map. I know one person asked about, does this only apply to the shaded areas? And then somebody else asked what the colors mean. So I'll just go over the maps real quick for anybody late. So on the map that's on the screen now, this is for Belmont Hillsborough. So basically east of 21st. If you're in the gray area is basically not going to be eligible for this unless you're on the other side of 21st on this one, because then you're on the other map. But or you're outside the district. So if you're on the other side of 12th Avenue, you're in District 17. You're not in District 18, so I didn't include you. But if you're in District 18 and you're in a gray area, that means that you are either in this area, you're probably zoned RM. There's a lot of RM zoning, especially along Belmont, north of Linden, and even part of Blair towards Belmont Avenue where it's grayed.
Yep. And for folks that don't know, that means multifamily.
Yeah, multifamily. So you're residential multifamily. And if you wanted to build a DADU style unit, you can. You just call it another residential unit on your property. And then the other area, there's some commercial zoning mixed in here as well. And then like as I said earlier, there is an area that is gray. The south side of Cedar Lane could technically, it does have alley access, so it could potentially be included in a DADU overlay if some of these R8 zone parcels around it were also included, so it can meet the 30 lot threshold. The single family zoned area on the north side of Cedar Lane going over towards the interchange, and as well as the south side of Cedar Lane, west of Primrose Avenue, when it makes that bend up. I don't believe either of those would be eligible due to lot size, and there's no alleyway in their zone, single family. Moving on to the other map, this one's a little different. It does not identify R8. I think there's only a couple of R8 lots mixed in. I think they all have HPRs or duplexes on them. So on this one, it's a little different. So each color represents different clusters that could be a DADU application, with the exception that the blue and green can sort of be combined in some way that's contiguous between the two of them. So like if the neighbors in Westmoreland wanted to do a DADU overlay, they would, because they're sort of separated from the other areas, it would have to be a standalone application from if the neighbors along Marlboro wanted to have it. So those would be two separate applications, and the colors are there to sort of distinguish the two separate areas that would need to be applied for.
I'm sorry if I missed this, but the blue and green.
Yeah, the blue and green, that's just a map error. I should have made them all the same color. That was just me zooming in to put the lots in. So that can be split either way, as long as they're contiguous and 30 units,
Right.
30 lots.
Like even the middle part of it could be.
Yeah, you can cut it in the middle, just as long as there's like 30 lots and whatever you come up with, and they all touch.
Right, okay. All right, sounds good. Let me look through the questions a little bit more.
Other thing I did see from Ada and Ethan, so for contiguous, when it applies to properties near institutions, so if they're separated, so if it's zoned RS and it's an institution, it would need to be included. We ran into this issue up in Highland Heights with a non-residential use that had been there forever that was zoned RS5. It ended up getting amended out along with some other lots that decided not to be in it at the end of the day. But had those lots wanted to be in the overlay, we would have had to keep that non-residential use in the overlay because it's zoned single family. And so that would be the same case here. I do know one thing, that there's another little map error on this. So like in the purple area around Westmoreland, I did accidentally leave in one of Vanderbilt's properties at the corner of Hillside and Sharondale. That can actually be cut out because it's separated from the rest of Westmoreland by the alley. And because it's separated by the alley, it would not be considered, it would be considered contiguous for the purpose of making the 30 lots required, but it wouldn't be required to be a part of it because it's separated by the alley. It doesn't directly abut. I know it's confusing, but
Gotcha.
that's just how it.
That makes sense to me. All right, are there any other questions?
Hey, John Tassell here. I had a question.
Hey, John.
Hey, so as I understand it, I mean, there has to be a separate bill passed, right? That sort of set, I mean, that creates the overlay in any particular area. And is there any provision or possibility to add additional conditions? Like, let's say, for instance, that some district said we want to add the overlay, but we want to make an extra rule that you have to provide an on-site off-street parking space for your DADU. Could that be added as an additional condition just for that one area?
No,
Yeah.
So this is a standard overlay in the zoning code, similar to the contextual overlay or the corridor design overlay, in that it's sort of this is going to sound a little blunt, but it's a take it or leave it overlay, where you have to take it all or leave it all.
Yeah, and John, just so you know, that I asked that very question as we were considering the overlay itself.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious.
Considering the overlay, yeah. And I will say that's one thing, like as I create a ballot, and I've kind of got a draft of one, like that's some information that we can collect. You know, do you have, and you know, if that's a concern, maybe we can, you know, gather data that, hey, you know, 20 of these properties say they have this parking, so it won't be street parking, or, you know, and to allay some fears. So it's data that we can collect, but it's not something we can require.
Okay, so the way the ordinance is written, it actually outlaws any additional conditions. I guess that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, the way that these overlays are drafted, they cannot be modified because of how they are included in how they're included in the zoning code. So like you're not making a new overlay, you're applying the existing overlay
Right. Okay.
zoning code, and so you can't really modify that.
Right.
Adopted.
Yeah, the reason I ask about the parking, because it seems like that's the thing that's going to concern most people, you know?
Right. Right. And you know, and there are parking tools in terms of like residential permit parking that if an area doesn't, or if the street doesn't already have it, we can you know, go to the ask for it from the Traffic and Parking Commission. And I do believe, you know, things move slowly, but I have over the last year talked to NDOT folks a lot, and I do think they're going to be getting better enforcement for like residential permit parking and like 2-hour parking. Right now it's very meter centric, but I think we're going to get meters that are smarter and don't need people to, you know, take the coins out and roll them up every time. And I've been promised that by 2 different directors that as they do that, they'll have more personnel available for residential permit and, you know, other parking zones other than meters. So I do feel optimistic that parking enforcement is going to get better for those of you that have residential permit parking and feel like it's not working. Miriam's got a question, and Miriam, I believe it's the same process it is. I mean, currently in a CZO, you know, they have to go for an outbuilding, which is, you know, the structure that DADU is a use, and outbuilding is the structure.
Yeah.
And
So
like even currently, the historic any outbuilding would have to be reviewed by any outbuilding in the CZO would have to be reviewed by historic. I don't think that they're involved in the overlay approval process at all. It's just when you ask for the permit for the structure, right?
So it would the current process. So historic would not. They might send like a recommendation letter or something because a lot of these areas are in a historic overlay. So Robin or Tim at historic might write a letter to the planning commission with their support or opposition if they have opposition to it. But in terms of what their review process is going to be, they're just going to be looking at the same thing that they're always looking at, which is like if you apply to build a new accessory structure on your property, they're going to make sure that it conforms with the standards of your historic overlay. So they're going to make sure it's not going to be too tall. It's going to have the right materials. It's going to have the right setback, things like that. I think Tim had a question.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Tim Nearhouse. I'm at 2416 Barton at the corner of Barton and 25th. I've talked to some neighbors about this, and one of the questions that came up is, can you build a garage and a DADU so that if you wanted to have an older parent, you know, move into the DADU, they could be on a single floor, but you wouldn't lose the ability to have a garage to park your cars? And it was a good question. I didn't really have the answer.
I feel like, Matthew, you probably have a better answer. I feel like I saw something as I was reading through this over the last week that says if you do build a DADU, you can't have any structures over 200 square feet.
Yeah, there is a restriction on additional structures. I don't think you'd be able to build a garage and a DADU. I think you could build one or the other, or you could stack it, but I don't think you could. I don't think that the way that the DADU language is written. Let me see if I can bring it back up real quick.
So do you think that you could put garage, if you had a 10,000 square foot lot, could you do 500 square feet garage, 500 square feet living space on the bottom for the total of 1,000?
Yeah, so if you had
In
10,000
one structure.
Yeah, let me, sorry, I forgot to answer that. So I'll look that up now and answer that real quick on terms of size. So on lots of 10,000 square feet or greater, so if your lot's 10,000 square feet, the footprint of the detached accessory dwelling shall not exceed 1,000 square feet. So I think when you get to 10,000 square feet, you could do like a one level with the garage and the dadu attached, or you could have the garage and the dadu on one level and 1,000 square feet.
But you could also do 1,000 down and 700 living up in that situation?
Yeah, because it's just the footprint.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
It's not looking at square footage.
So the 700 would stay the same.
Yeah, the
on
700
top.
stays the same.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
And in terms of, let me see if I can find, yeah. Yeah, so if you have a dadu on your property, no additional accessory structure shall exceed 200 square feet. So this would, a dadu or a garage dadu combination would be your only major accessory structure on your property in this case.
And the total could never exceed 700. So if you did 500 and 500 of living and garage down, you couldn't really do much up because you'd only have 200 feet left of the 700, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay,
Unless
thank
you could probably get away with some storage or something that's not living area.
you. Okay. Thanks. And Tom, you can
Yeah.
count me in trying to, get the Barton area involved in this.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think Martha had I don't know if I think it's a comment, but maybe there's a question. Let's see. Wait. Martha, does your PS, is there something before the PS or does it start with the? All right. Martha lets us know. And I think this is kind of what Laura Swanson and I were kind of referring to, although the dates might be different. That when CZ overlay, conservation overlay was significantly expanding, basically south of Blair, making the RS zoning less essential for the purpose of discouraging like overdevelopment or tear downs. Yeah.
Yes. Hey, Tom, I was just
Yes.
lending some historical background to why there was some RS zoning in the first place.
Yeah. It was. I mean, I was surprised that that red area there was 1998. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember like a 2006 major down zone and it was kind of anticipating the conservation overlay, but knew it would take more time. But it sounds like more of DHN was down zone before that, or at least some of it. I remember Ginger doing it kind of near the end, kind of in her second term. And
So in H-Win, if I could just jump in, John Tassell is correct that there was a first wave of conservation zoning in H-Win in the mid 2000s. And then the later expansion was like 2014 that probably doubled it. And so in between, there would have been a lot of historic homes torn down to put up two houses had there not been a down zone from
Right.
R to RS. So
Right.
that's all. It's just historical information for anybody.
yeah, and I think I talked to Ginger about that, not super recently, but at some point, kind of recently, and what you say reflects what I understood her to say.
And this was true in BHN also,
Okay.
because when we went after conservation overlay for Cedar, it was going to take a good bit longer, and there were some real threats on the horizon, and the house had already been torn down. And so we were able to get RS 7.5 more quickly than we could get a conservation overlay.
Exactly. All right.
And then we had the conservation overlay too.
Right. All right. And
Miriam, sorry, Councilman Cash.
that's fine.
I was going to say, Miriam had a question about could a carport be allowed to be attached to the dadu? Under Metro codes, a carport or anything else with a roof structure like that is considered a structure. So the square footage of the carport would be treated the same as a garage in that instance.
Gotcha. Thanks. That's what I was thinking too. And Miriam also had a question, and I don't know if it's rhetorical, but why would historic kind of have a say in supporting or opposing an overlay? I would be surprised if they would get in the middle of it, honestly, because they are, you know, when they go through the outbuilding approval process or disapproval process or just process, they're quick to note that they have nothing to do with use. And this is pretty much a use change. So I don't expect that they would, but never say never.
They probably won't, but I do know in some instances when some zone changes are sought, sometimes departments like historic, if they see an interest in it and they don't think that the zoning aligns with the goals of the overlay or whatever other issue may be, they will sometimes write a letter to the planning commission outlining their thoughts on the issue at hand, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. So a lot of times they'll just say like no exception or something along those lines, which basically we're not looking at that. So I believe that hopefully it'll just be like a no exception thing, but if they do, they'll probably want that. They may take a little bit of a harder look just because of how much of this area is in conservation overlay.
Gotcha. Aiden has a question about, would the overlay change what developers would be allowed to build in any way other than giving the option to build a main house and a DADU? I don't think so. I mean, I would think that the footprint, the 45% footprint would still apply, at least for single family. And I don't think it would change anything. Remember that some of these areas, like Aiden, like a part of that area that is near you, a part of that colored in area that is near you. I mean, like north of Little Blakemore, I think we're not in the CZO anymore. Like I don't think the stuff between 32nd and 31st, after you pass the alley above you, like Dudley, Vanderbilt Place, I don't think any of that is in a CZO. So I don't think it would change, but that area has fewer requirements because there's a lack of a CZO. But Matthew, do you know?
So this won't change existing building entitlements other than allowing for the DADU within the parameters of the DADU. So if they do build a DADU, they're limited to the restrictions on footprint. So like I said, if it's a 10,000 square foot or less lot, they're limited to 750 square foot footprint for the building. And if it's bigger, they can do the 1,000 square foot footprint for the building.
Okay. Any other questions? I'm seeing one here, but I think and Matthew, we're saving the video, but these comments we need to get before we leave the meeting. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't believe the comments will show up in the video recording.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna make sure I copy them because I'm not sure that I got everyone. And guys, if I did not answer your question, or you come up with one afterwards or have comments, feel free to email me. I'm gonna copy that. I'm pasting these comments here, so I make sure I got them.
So Miriam asked, does the DADU share a driveway with the principal dwelling? So if there's alley access to the property where they're building the DADU, then the DADU must use the alley. If it's the 15,000 square foot lot size where there's no alley, then it has to share the driveway with the principal structure.
All right, it's wanting me to do some emojis or something. Stop.
Aiden and Ethan had a question about incentives to build DADUs for affordable housing.
Yeah, I'm glad that you go ahead, but I want to comment on that too.
I was just going to defer to you.
Okay, I don't, so there's a state law that kind of makes it difficult for us to add any incentives. I mean, like we can encourage them, but it's
Yeah.
not something that we can put in legislation, like in an SP or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it's, I mean, it's something that developers can offer to do.
Mhm.
I know there've been some changes, and there's been a like inclusionary zoning bill that's been going through, and I think is now being reconsidered or resubmitted in a little bit different way. But
Yeah, and I don't think that's really targeting DADUs. I think that's targeting larger.
yeah, that's
Essentially the state has outlawed required affordable housing as a part of an entitlement. And it's also outlawed incentivizing through the granting of zoning entitlements, affordable housing. So really, the only thing that there's some creative solutions being looked at by other council members. One of them, which the first one, which I think they've sort of backed off of, was a thing targeting downtown areas where they were going to give bonus height in the downtown code for the creation of affordable housing that would be leased to Metro at market rate, that Metro would then turn around and lease as affordable or workforce. And I think that sort of has been tabled at the moment. And then the current bill that they're looking at is the creation of an affordable housing pilot, which is a payment in lieu of taxes. And that would target larger developments and where the developer could receive a reduced tax burden through a pilot instead of in exchange for creating affordable and workforce housing. I believe the city of Memphis has a similar program right now. I'm not sure where that legislation stands. I think it might be on second or first reading coming up. So it's something in the pipeline. It's not targeting something as small scale as a DADU.
gotcha. And I'm guessing. Let me back up. There's a new question. Hold on. And Aiden, I mean, there's the other side of this. So, in terms of like the DADU itself could be considered more affordable. It's smaller than most, at least houses, and you know, just based on square foot, we would hope that it would be a little more affordable. But there's also it allows somebody who owns a property to collect some income and maybe be more easily able to afford the house. And that's what I was going to say is that's one of the things that I do like about DADU overlays is that it, you know, it's not out of town. You know, it gives us some extra housing, some extra density, which I think is a little more spread out than what we see on corridors and in some other places. But it also lets homeowners in Nashville kind of benefit from, you know, numerous homeowners benefit from the expansion of housing, which is what I like about it. And Laura's question, I think it can't be used.
So, Laura, in regards to, essentially, if you're in the DADU overlay, short-term rental is already prohibited from the DADU use. So you can't use it. You can't use the DADU for your owner-occupied short-term rental permit. You can still you can still short-term rent rooms in your main home, but you can't use the DADU for any sort of short-term renting. However, we as stated earlier, we can't modify the overlay to add in different conditions. But fortunately, the DADUs that are built in the DADU overlay are already restricted to long-term renting or the use as like a mother-in-law suite where it's not rented out at all.
Just to clarify, but in the areas that are R8 and can already build the DADU, they do not have that restriction, right?
They do not have that restriction on their use of DADU.
Okay.
So this really only applies to 7.5.
The restriction on short-term rentals only applies the overlay. So, I mean, you could theoretically apply the DADU overlay to the R8 areas, and that would put on that short-term rental restriction. But that's up for you guys and the council member to decide if you want to do that. We did do that a little bit in the North Nashville overlay around Clay Street. So a lot of the areas around Clay Street were zoned, I believe, R6. And we went ahead and included them in the DADU overlay at the request of the neighbors and the council member.
Gotcha. And Miriam, are you saying medium-term housing as opposed to short-term or long-term? I don't know that there's anything in the code about medium-term. I mean, long-term is 30 days or more.
Anything over 30 days is considered long-term housing, long-term renting. So
Okay.
less than 30 days is considered short-term renting.
All right. So I'm sorry if I'm going to go through and copy these comments again to make sure I capture them. And I'm sorry if we've missed anything, but like I said, email me. Both questions and feedback in terms of like if you want one. This is driven by what the property owners want. I don't have a predetermined like yes I'm going to do one or no I'm not going to do one. It's all about feedback, and I thought this educational meeting and Q&A was the right place to start. There was also a fairly good article in the WIN newsletter, gosh, sometime last year after the DADU overlay passed. I think it's on the WIN website, and it's one of the more recent WIN newsletters. But I think we covered most everything tonight that was mentioned in there. All right. So it's been an hour, and I know folks got weekend plans coming up, and Easter and Good Friday. I hope you all have a nice, relaxing weekend or eventful weekend if that's what you're aiming for. And this is just the beginning of the discussion. Reach out to me, and we'll see if we want to move forward.
And the video of this meeting will be posted to the Metro Nashville YouTube page, probably by Monday, hopefully tomorrow, but probably by Monday, if not tomorrow.
Okay.
And then you can come back and or you want to take another look at the map if you don't have a copy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll conclude the meeting now. Thank you.
Okay.
Guys.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Take care.
everybody.